Let's take a trip back to the beginning of all things, starting with the gods before there were gods, when we learn what led to the invention of an all-powerful weapon that took the form of a child. It's all right here in our review of The New Gods number 3 from DC Comics. But before we dig in, here's a quick recap. When we last left the children of the High Father in The New Gods number 2, Scott Free, also known as Mr. Miracle, decided to accept Orion's request to find and flee with a child who could be a great power in the universe. Through several sets of scenes involving Metron on Apocalypse and the fractured leaders who remained after Darkseid's death, we learn the child in question may be the future heir to Darkseid's vacant throne. The issue ended with a god killer known as Karak the Scavenger coming to take advantage of the power vacuum left by Darkseid's absence. And here we have the current issue. The New Gods number 3 begins with an extended history of the gods of old. I'm going to try to say these names here, hopefully if I get them right, bear with me. We have Parzunem, we have Arborstruta, and we have Niktar. Arborstruta gathered and led the abandoned people and refugees of war to start new beginnings. She is the god of growth and renewal, if you will. Niktar gathered his followers to explore the farthest reaches of space as the god of wanderers and explorers. Parzurem spent his many days remaining back on their homeworld, building new machines because he is the god of invention and discovery. During Niktar's great travels, he one day encounters a darkness that corrupts all it touches, including Niktar himself. The wandering god returned home, now infected with this great darkness, kills and consumes his sister, Arborstruta, to become immensely powerful, or at least powerful enough to defeat his brother, Parzurem, and pressure the god of invention to build war machines. Parzurem refuses, but he foresaw such a predicament, so he sent fractures of his mind, bear with me, it's gonna get there, he sent fractures of his mind, the Moder and the Pater, I think I'm saying that right, out into the universe to find freedom elsewhere because he knew he would be trapped for eternity. Moder would eventually be captured by the gravity pull of the world that would one day become known as New Genesis. So there's a connection to the New Gods as we understand them today, although what exactly the Moder is in New Genesis is never explained. Conversely, Pater would find its home on the planet that would eventually become known as Earth. When life evolved on Earth to become sentient, so we have sort of like these proto-humans eventually becoming Neanderthals, eventually becoming tribes people, Pater took the shape of a human to live among them as one of them, but above them as an immortal, eternal god. After eons, Pater chose to learn the one thing it had never known, which is death. I've done everything, there's nothing left for me to do. I wonder what death is like, is what Pater says. Fearful, though, that the evolving humans could not survive on their own without Pater's protection, Pater created an adaptable weapon that would awaken if darkness fell across the land. That weapon is the child Scott Free now searches for. The issue then cuts to the present with a completely different artist and a completely different writing style. It almost feels like it's a completely separate comic, which is part of the critique we'll get to in a minute. Scott and Barda seek out the help of Oberon for help locating the child that they're supposed to go find. Oberon happens to have a tracking portal to fit the bill because he knew Scott's claims of retiring and becoming a suburban house dad were a bunch of BS nonsense. So he said, I was prepared for things to go south, so we built some things that could help you out if you ever got into trouble. So he zaps them through the portal, and they wind up in the middle of a car chase with the parents and the child in the back of a car that's being attacked by the mercenaries we saw in the first and second issues. And that's how the issue ends. So let's talk about impressions, art, and pluses and minuses. If you've listened to the description all the way through to the end, first and foremost, I want to congratulate you for your patience. That was a lot to get through, and it was even more to read through. Second, you're probably wondering what the hell is going on, and you'd be right to ask that question because that seems like a lot of information that has nothing to do with the story at hand. We'll get to that one in a minute as well. Nobody self-sabotages what should be a straightforward story like Rom V, trying to impress everyone with his overblown sense of self-important magnificence. So if you're kind of picking up on the signals of where this review is going, you're probably right. Let's just sit back and enjoy the train wreck. Let's start with the art, because this is a weird one to critique. The New Gods #3 flip-flops back and forth in time, with Riccardo Federici handling the past and everything associated with the ancient gods, and we have Evan Cagle handling the present. Both artists have wildly different styles, but each looks pretty fantastic in their own way. There's no quarrel with the art in this comic. I think if you just look at it at a macro level, you'll enjoy what you're looking at. But it essentially feels like two comics that were just cut in random places and then spliced together back to back. There's no cohesion, there's no rhyme or reason. Their styles don't complement each other in any way. So individually the art is fine. Put together as one cohesive comic, it's a chaotic mess. So it's bad and good at the same time, which is really weird. So let's switch over to the story and talk about some of the positives. Separately, Rom V has two stories that I think would be worth reading, albeit suited for two very different audiences. The History of the Gods reads like a very highbrow space opera from the highest nobility, infused with meaning, myth, symbolism, matter of all different levels. There's a lot of deep interpretation that you would need to get through that story and really grasp everything that's happening there. The present day action scene, which really comes at toward the end of the comic, is one of the better examples of characters taking their first steps to heed the call of adventure, to use a writing term. The presentation is snappy, the dialogue is punchy, and there's definitely a bit of charm, especially between Scott, Barter, and Oberon. So there's a lot to like in those individual pieces. So let's talk about where this issue falls short. Rom V is doing his best Rom V impression by taking a clear concept and overwriting the snot out of it while convoluting the plot at the same time. The History of the Gods is interesting as a novel concept, but 80 to 90% of that backstory is irrelevant to the present plot, adding complications where none were needed to make a simple story just fancy. You could have easily begun with Peter, or Peter if you will, coming to Earth as an alien looking for a peaceful place to settle, and the story would have turned out exactly the same. So even though all that highbrow space opera theatrics in the majority of the comic really is maybe interesting in and of itself, it does nothing to serve the story. It's wasted when it comes to plot movement and plot development, which means, again, Rom V is one of the worst examples of not understanding pacing and not understanding how to keep the audience engaged with a central concept. Now, look, calm down. But before you start running off to write your anti-opinion pieces on Reddit or Twitter or whatever else, there's nothing wrong with smart writing. There's nothing wrong with highbrow, intelligent storytelling. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is you can't do highbrow, intelligent, deep, thoughtful, meaningful story writing and then sacrifice other elements of the story to make it happen. Rom V is one of those cadre of writers who chooses to make things complicated, unnecessarily so, and pretentious sounding, especially in the narration, in order to prove what a fancy, intelligent writer he is. And it turns out badly because he sacrifices pace, he sacrifices plot movement, he sacrifices conciseness, he sacrifices clarity to do it. If you make it fancy, but you have to sacrifice the basic underpinnings of storytelling, then it's a waste. It doesn't work, and that's what we have here. Final thoughts, what do we think about the New Gods #3? It turns the fancy meter up to 11 and the pretentious knob all the way to max, when readers get a space opera of kingly proportions to explain how the child at the center of this arc came to be. Rom V's penchant for overwriting and overthinking the narration and backstory takes the simplest ideas and turns it on its head, which is par for the course, unfortunately. The mashup between the past and the present is so discontinuous that your eyeballs will trip trying to read this comic, and the whole thing wraps up with a basic unfinished car chase. Whatever page rates Rom V is getting paid for this series, it's probably too much, because you shouldn't sacrifice foundational storytelling just to be fancy. That said, the score is going to earn some bonus points because the art, even though it's two artists and they're pretty uncomplimentary to each other, is fantastic. Therefore, the New Gods #3 earns a 5 out of 10. Some people are going to think that score is too high. Some people are going to think that score is too low. I think it is appropriate for the quality of the art and the lack of quality in the storytelling. But what do you think? Are you enjoying this series? Do you want to see more of this kind of weird, noble space opera type of storytelling from DC? Leave a thumbs up if you found this review helpful, and drop a comment below with which New God character is your favorite that may have already shown up or hasn't shown up yet, but you want to see him in the series. That's speaking to all of the 24 New Gods fans out there, which, well, maybe that'll change. Also, remember to click on the link in the description to read the written review, check out the variant covers and preview pages, and buy this comic to help support the channel. Your support, of course, is greatly appreciated. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please click on the subscribe button down below. So thank you very much for joining, and stay tuned through the outro for more reviews just like this one.